When you're ready, Ward.
I think we've missed it.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest online offering from the Black Country Society. It looks quite an exciting programme, and the numbers of those of you joining are increasing by the minute. It's currently
59.
I wonder if those of you who are not actually involved in leading the evening could switch your microphones off. There are
Ward, you switched yours off as well.
Right, we'll start again. The microphones are switching on and off, but I'm on now, so I hope everybody can hear me. A word of welcome to Rebecca Wilton, our speaker this evening, that fascinating subject of Eliza Tinsley, the Black Country Nail Mistress. And if you know anything about Black Country history, if you don't know about Eliza Tinsley, you've got a lot to learn yet. So a little bit of introduction about Rebecca and her background. Rebecca has a long-standing interest in local and social history, particularly history from below, those hidden lives lost amongst the bigger stories of kings, queens, politicians and wars. And that's something that I'm particularly pleased to hear about. Having spent many years at the Black Country Museum, telling the stories of the Black Country canals, she now lives by a canal in South Staffordshire. The talk tonight is all about the life and business of the Black Country Nail Mistress, Eliza Tinsley. Somewhat of a local legend, this lady was the subject of Rebecca's MA in West Midlands history. The talk is based on this extensive research and gives insights into Eliza's childhood, her family life, and what made her successful as a businesswoman with a huge legacy. Rebecca, we're delighted to have you with us. We know you're anxious about the use of the web and this particular program of Zoom, but we're confident that we'll get you through it. And I hand over to you now. Sorry, just one thing to add, that if any of the audience have questions, please can you write them in the chat box, and when Rebecca's finished speaking to us, Andrew will take us through the questions that you've posed, and we'll look forward to what Rebecca has to say to us. Now, definitely handing over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Ward. That was a lovely introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, you can't see. Oh, there's she's appeared. Thank you.
Yeah, you can hear me, you can see. The host muted me.
I'm sorry, Rebecca, that's my fault.
What a start, what a start.
Well,
yeah, you can all hear me and see me now, I hope. Chris can, yeah, Chris will tell me. So Chris will put me right if we start going wrong in any of the technical aspects. But it's lovely to be here speaking to you all today. It's been a while since I've done any talks, and time flies really. It's been a good well over 5 years now when I did this dissertation, and a couple of years since I've done any Eliza talk. So it's a pleasure to dig it back out really and talk to you all about it tonight. I'm going to try now and get the presentation up. So just 1 minute, I have to share a screen. So if you just give me 1 second, and then again, Chris maybe can let me know if it's all coming through for you to see. So if I press share screen, find my presentation. I'm using a Google Chromebook, which I don't particularly like. So let's see how we get on. Share there. Has that worked, Chris?
That's fine, Becky.
Excellent. Right, so we should have the title slide up there. So this is my talk, The Life and Legacy of Eliza Tinsley. She was born in 1813, died in 1882. Now, if I press once, we should get on to the next slide, which I'm guessing a lot of you will know. You'll know what this picture is. It's a very well-known picture of the Black Country Living Museum, which is where I spent an awful long time down on that canal side talking all about narrow boats and people's lives on boats. If we look at the sort of the scene, if you like, this is exactly what it would have looked like where Eliza's workers would have lived. She wouldn't have been living here. She had eventually lived in a very nice house called the Limes, out of the smoke. But the smoky village, there's little chain and nail shops and backyard workshops, exactly the sort of places that Eliza's workers would have been bashing out chains and nails. But we're not talking about canals. We're going to be talking about Eliza. So let's carry on now to the next slide, which, and I think Ward said, you probably all, I'm guessing most of you have heard of Eliza Tinsley. Some of you probably know an awful lot about her because she is this kind of local legend. But this is a nice little introduction. I was pleased Chris put the picture of her up there because that's the only picture that anybody ever sees. I did discover some more pictures during the course of my research, but really that's the only one that's out there that's published. And this initial slide to just give you a little bit of an introduction to Eliza. It was sculpture that was, I think it's down at which canal is it down now? It's part of the Dudley Canal Trail. So Luke Perry, who you may or may not be aware of, is a local sculptor, and he did this way back in 2010. And there's a number of these sculptures all along the canal. One of them is to commemorate Eliza. And so it says, she's a proper black country woman. These are Luke's words. Eliza was widowed in 1851 with 5 kids, but still managed to run her husband's company. So over 20 years, she built up a small business to one employing over 4,000 people. She made some of the world's longest chain, and the company is still a going concern. It spans 3 centuries. So we've got the company logo there, and they do still commemorate, if you like, and they still use Eliza's name for their publicity. So if we move on now to the next one. Okay, so as Ward said, we're going to be, hopefully that I'm going to offer a few insights today, things that maybe you didn't know about Eliza, because we know a bit about her business, don't we? And there's sort of different stories out there. But what I wanted to do is try and get to grips with who she was and why she became so popular. So what was her childhood like? Was there anything in her childhood that suggested she would go on to be this strong and successful businesswoman? I also wanted to look at her marriage and her family life, and again, how that impacted upon her empire, how that sort of, So business empire, and then moving on finally to her legacy. So what did she leave behind? What did she leave behind in terms of her family, but also her money, her will, her home, property, things like that. And then eventually we'll move on to a little conclusion. So I'll keep an eye on the time, and we'll try and zip through all of this in about 50 minutes so that there's time for questions and discussion at the end. So when I started out the work, I looked at what existed in what was available at the time. And interestingly, Eliza had got an entry in the Dictionary of National Biography, quite unusual for a woman of that time, particularly a businesswoman, but we can find that. There's a story in the Black Countryman going back in the 1980s, another one in the Bugle in the 1970s, and there's loads of different discussions on history websites and blogs, but nothing academic and nothing really comprehensive. So I started off with those pieces of work, and from then I was looking for different sources, a whole range of different sources that would sort of flesh out a picture of Eliza. So there was 2 academic-y pieces of work that I was basing things around. One was the approach, if you like. So Constructing the 18th Century Woman was a PhD by a lady called Kate, and it was her approach really that I adopted. So she adopted this patchwork approach to her sources. So you're not looking at one set of discrete sources, you're looking at anything you can find. So things ranging from censuses to newspapers to wills to business papers. You know, there isn't a discrete archive of Eliza Tinsley, so it was all about putting together all these different sets of sources and seeing what you'd find really. And then again, I wanted to compare Eliza with other business women, and luckily Jennifer Aston had done this, a PhD, female business owners in England, and she compared 50 business women, I think from where did she do? Birmingham and Leeds. So we could locate Eliza amongst those women. And well, I can tell you now, she was the most successful of all of these business women. So, and finally, this final piece of work, and I've never met Pam Inder or Marion Oldest, but I would like to one day. They actually write a short chapter, a whole chapter on Eliza. But unfortunately, I didn't find their account very flattering. They describe her as plump, plain, and unsmiling, which potentially you do get that from that picture that we all see. But that was how they described Eliza. And they called her sons inept bachelor sons. She had 3 sons, 3 daughters, which we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, they weren't very kind about the sons. They were inept bachelors. And Eliza was described as merely a figurehead. That isn't the conclusion that I come to, and we'll talk about that as we go through. I think she was a lot more than a figurehead. Oh, I've pressed it twice. I think we're still safe though. Okay, so looking at Eliza's childhood, as I said, she was born in Wolverhampton, and she was born in a pub. But a pub could be anything really, couldn't it? It could be a little backstreet thing, a little brew house. But Eliza's home wasn't like that. It was the Fleece, and it was a coaching inn. So it was a big, busy, cosmopolitan sort of place, really, in Wolverhampton, with all the traffic passing through. And we've got a picture of it just there. Next to that, St. Peter's Church, and that lovely open aspect that you don't get now in Wolverhampton. It's all completely built up. That was a local church. So she'd have walked from her home in the Fleece to St. Peter's Church in Wolverhampton, where she was christened and where she'd have been going for Sunday services. Oh, what have we got here? So we've got a picture now of what Wolverhampton looked like around the time Eliza was born. So there's the church there, slightly less of an open aspect, I suppose. And that's the very busy open market before it became Queen Square. So in the coaching age, I think I just mentioned, it would have been quite cosmopolitan, busy. People were passing through Wolverhampton, stopping overnight in the Fleece. So by looking at Wolverhampton at this time, you get a bit of a snapshot of life, not just Eliza's life, but of life in Wolverhampton around 1830. And I found this advert, which is an advert for when there was a coach office at the Fleece Inn, and it shows you all the places, London, Liverpool, Shrewsbury, that the coaches were passing through. So in order to sort of get to grips with Eliza and her life, I wanted to construct a family. I really quite like doing family trees, as I'm sure lots of you do. So we started off by making a family tree, and I found her parents and when they got married, and I found her brothers and sisters, and she had 3 brothers. In fact, she didn't have a sister. She had daughters. She didn't have a sister. She had 3 brothers, and 2 of them died quite early on, as happened. Her dad was described not just as a publican, but he was described as a file cutter. And her dad's brothers, they were all from Wensfield. They were all metal workers from over that direction, and Wilton, sorry. So by the time she was 16, she was orphaned. So her dad died quite early in 1827. I think they stayed at the Fleece. She stayed with her mum at the Fleece, and would have been having to help out with her brothers. Her eldest brother was 12. Her little brother, Frederick, had died. So there was only 1 brother left, and 2 brothers, a younger brother and a middle brother. Her dad had wrote a will. So again, they're not poor people. Eliza didn't, it's not like a rags to riches tale, really. She was born into this coaching life with metalworking business people in her family. And as I say, her dad had left a will, and so did her mum. But by the time she was 16, she was an orphan. We don't really know what happened to her then after being 16. I mean, we can imagine that she was potentially that she went to Wellinor, to her dad's side of the family, and was involved in business over there. But we really don't know what happened until she gets married, till we find her again with the marriage records, and we find her getting married. And so this is when Eliza Butler becomes Eliza Tinsley, and she marries Thomas Tinsley in Sedgley. Now, Thomas Tinsley, again, was not a poor person or a poor nail maker. His father was quite the local business person in Sedgley. They run sick clubs. They paid their workers in truck, which many of you would think of as a bad, awful, bad thing. It's a notorious, awful system. However, potentially, Mr. Tinsley, her father-in-law, maybe wasn't all that bad, because you don't know, with the sick clubs that he ran and the insurance schemes and things like that, potentially he was trying to help his workers out. So yes, so she marries at All Saints in Sedgley. This is when we find Eliza in Sedgley, which is where you're probably familiar, where she lived at the Limes eventually. But at the moment, she's not living at the Limes, not yet. We'll have a look at some censuses and see what she's actually doing when she first gets married. Now, that's not Eliza, that's Queen Victoria. But they married at a very similar time. They're both, I should imagine that Eliza kind of looked up to the Queen, and kind of they're similar age and similar family sizes. So she was christened at St Peter's and married at All Saints, which is just a little aside. That's my mum was christened at St Peter's and married at All Saints in Sedgley. It's a strange little coincidence. So you're probably going to struggle to see these censuses. What I should have done is transcribe them for you, really, but I'll just talk you through a little bit about what we can see on the screen and what it's telling us. And it's telling us that Eliza's just got married. It's 1841. She's living in Sedgley, but she's not living at the Limes. I think it's she's Sheepcut Walk. I think she's living at this point. She lives next door to her to her brother-in-law, and her father is over this side, a father-in-law. So they're all living very close together in a reasonably well-off part of Sedgley, but certainly not a big fancy, certainly not the fancy house, the Limes, that you might know. Thomas is described as a nail ironmonger, as is his brother. Eliza's there, she's 25, and their first daughter, Elizabeth, is just 1. And they've got a lodger living with them as well there. So we trace her through the censuses, and then 10 years later, we find Thomas Tinsley, but he's now being described as a nail master. They've moved to Woodset into a bigger property. Eliza has had all of her children now. So we've got Elizabeth, Catherine, Charles, Thomas. Oh dear. I can't go back now. So we're just going to have to, I'll have to talk through this bit. So it's a whole family there. And it's quite sad in a way, because this is the last picture, if you like, of her entire family together. Because quite soon after this census was taken, her husband Thomas passed away, and so did her eldest daughter, who'd always been described as a sickly child. She's buried, or they're all buried, in a family plot at All Saints in Sedgley, but she was the first to go in there. And her husband died as well. By this point, they just moved into in 1851 census, they weren't at the Limes. At some point between the 1851 census and when her husband died, within 6 months, they'd moved into the Limes. So she just moved into a brand new, beautiful house, but her husband had died and her daughter had died, and she was left with this business. So that's the start of Eliza's business empire, I suppose. It was her husband's business. It wasn't a huge concern, certainly nothing like what she grows it into. But before we have a look at her business, let's just have a little bit of a look at her family. And I'll try not to click through more than once. So this is Elizabeth, who I was telling you about. Now, we don't have any images that we know of Elizabeth. I say she was just 10 or 11 when she died. But she was anecdotally sickly, and she wasn't baptised until 6 months old. She had a special nurse. And we can see here on the screen the family plot where Elizabeth's buried. So she lived to be 11, but anecdotally not a well child. Next, we've got Catherine, and she's the only daughter that survived into adulthood. And unfortunately, Catherine didn't live that long. I think she was 43 when she died. But she survived into adulthood. She also married at All Saints, and she married into an affluent and successful military family, the Hamiltons. She travels widely, as you'd expect, maybe the daughter of a middle-class businesswoman. In this military family, so she travels quite a lot. You can pick her up on different censuses. She's the only child of Eliza's to produce grandchildren, and she actually, despite dying at 43, she managed to produce 7 children. So Eliza actually had 7 grandchildren, all Catherine's children. Died when she was 43. She left a fairly modest estate, so just less than £10,000 today. There is an image that I've managed to find of Catherine. It's really quite an interesting picture. And it's available on the Dudley Archives catalogue. Unfortunately, they're all copyright, so I can't particularly put them in this presentation. I did have permission to use them for my dissertation, so we were able to look at them and examine these pictures. And I spoke to a costume historian about what it sort of said about Catherine, about her clothes and what have you. But unfortunately, can't use the picture here. But if you go onto the Dudley Archives catalogue, you can find pictures of her children, Catherine being one of them. Let's zip through. Now we've got Lucy. Lucy, you might have come across, because there's a few scandals about Lucy. You know, did she run away and have a baby, or did and die in childbirth, or she was 20 when she died, and she died in Torquay. Sadly, there's no scandal. There's nothing really very exciting. She had bad lungs, like so many people that grew up in the Black Country. She'd been sent to Torquay to get the air, and unfortunately, that's where she died, aged just 20. I managed to find this little picture of Lucy in the William Salt Library in Stafford. I can't remember how on earth I came across that. Her will was there, so I was there transcribing Eliza's will, I think. And I looked through some of the documents, and I managed to find that. So that's a young Lucy there. There's another picture of Lucy that you can get in the Dudley Archive catalogue. She's a little bit older, and her skirt's a little bit shorter. Sorry, yeah. So she's just a different look of Lucy when she's a little bit older than that. And this picture here is actually Carey Crescent, where Lucy was staying and living. So you can see it's a very nice, affluent place that she was sent to. Well, hopefully she was supposed to improve her health, but unfortunately that didn't happen, and that's Lucy lost her life there in Torquay. There's documents showing her mum, Eliza, visits her there, and can't remember if it was census or a newspaper cutting or some kind of bizarre source that I managed to find a record of Eliza with her daughter in Torquay. Sons, the inept bachelors, right? So there's three bachelor sons. They're all quite wild. I think Eliza had quite a difficult relationship with some of them, and we'll come on to that as we go along. Now, the boys, they were all sent to an academy to educate the sons of liberal gentlemen. And at this school, there was 54 boarders, day students, and there's an idea that maybe she was trying to iron out their accents. If you want to a middle-class marriage, then you don't want them to have a thick Black Country accent. Not that I haven't got a particularly thick Black Country accent, but ironing out their accents, sending them away, and of course there would have been clean air. So it's an impressive building there that we can see where they did their schooling. Now, you might have thought that, well, Eliza, she's this successful businesswoman, she's running her own business, independent. Surely she'd send her daughters to a school like the boys so they'd get an education. She didn't. All her daughters were educated at home, and they were all being prepared for marriage as well, but being prepared to look nice and entertain and do whatever middle-class wives are supposed to do. Whereas it was the boys, they were sent off to get an education. So I thought that's quite interesting, because you might have thought she'd be a little bit more modern in her outlook for girls' education, but clearly not. She was very traditional, very conservative. So let's have a quick look at these boys and what they all did. Charles is the son that she does a lot of business with, I think. I put that in there. Pretty sure, yeah. Yeah, he tends to be doing more business with his mom. And as I've put here, he appeared to have lots of different businesses, and he's struggling to pay off loans and mortgages. And he leaves the UK eventually for Australia in 1889. And 4 years later, no fixed abode. All his partnerships are dissolved with his mom and others. And by 1900, he's died. He died in Victoria, Australia. But he left quite a bit, reasonable amount of money, really. So considering he was having debts and troubles and all the rest of it, and of no fixed abode, he left a modest estate of over £200,000 in today's money. So he wasn't poverty-stricken, was he? But he did spend his time, or the end of his life, in Australia, when all his businesses with his mum had been dissolved. His mum being Eliza, right? So the next son we've got is Thomas. Don't know the huge amount about Thomas Tinsley, other than we know he went to America, and he went to San Francisco, and he would have been part of that kind of gold craze. And what have we got here? The entire city buzzed with tales of chambermaids who bought the rooming houses they'd worked in a few weeks earlier, and of former ditch diggers riding down newly fashionable Kearney Street in opulent carriages. So he went there to make his fortune. And he died, I think he died there, did he? I'll have to come back to you whether I don't know if I actually found his death. I think I certainly found him travelling. Not sure if I found out where he died. I'd have to come back to you. Finally, we've got George, and he's the most interesting to me of all the children, I suppose. Charles is quite interesting with all his dodgy dealings, but George, he's lived the longest life. He lived to be 81. He left really quite a big estate, nearly £800,000. He apparently had quite a successful life. I found him I traced him through all the different censuses. He was farming 33 acres. He had 4 farmhands, 3 servants, spent 50 years in Wales, and was quite a character in the local area. He was known as a gentleman farmer. And he's all over the newspapers because, well, twice, because it was the story at the time. The story was everywhere at the time when he was nearly killed, nearly dragged on the floor by a runaway horse. And a young girl who lived in the area saved him and stopped the runaway horse. So that story was in the paper all over the place. It was up and down the country, if you like. And then later, when he died, the story appears again because he left £2,300 to this young lady that rescued him. And I think they remained friends. I think he used to take her for drives, and they used to have some sort of friendship after that. And then George as well, he was the one who registered his mother's death. So despite living in Wales, he must have been there when she died, whereas the other 2 boys were off away in different countries. Okay, well, we've got business empire. I think we're doing all right for time. I hope so. Everybody, I can't get any response, which is weird. I'm used to people talking to me and telling me if they're all right, but I hope everybody's all right and you're all.
Well, I'll tell you, you're all right, and we're all right for time.
Are we all good? Are we, Chris? That's
Yeah,
good.
no.
Good. Okay, well, we've got a bit more to talk about now. Then we'll go on. We've talked a bit about her family, her children, and now let's have a look at her business empire. What happened after her husband died in 1851? What did Eliza do with the business? Oh, I suppose, yeah, first of all, let's just have a little think about what that business was. So she worked in the nail. She was nail mistress, but nails were really in decline. Not cut nails, because that was another industry that carried on, but the sort of nail making that Eliza was into, it had peaked. It had really peaked. So she inherited a really inherited a business in a difficult and declining industry. She did branch into chain making and all sorts of other metal work. She got different contracts for lots of different metal products. It wasn't just nails. So she expanded that business. Her husband, by the look of it, was mainly doing nails, but she expanded into other things. But difficult industry, strikes, foggers and middlemen, which again, I'm guessing that you know all the sort of dodgy deals that the middlemen would buy iron rods that have 2 different sets of scales so that they could cheat the poor nail makers and probably fiddle their bosses as well. So these middlemen were really the ones that were not so nice. Eliza would have had her own middlemen, I presume. It was characterised by outwork as well as warehouses. So I haven't got to the bottom of just how many factories she actually had, because one of the, I don't know if it's a myth or not, but one of the lines is that she sort of revolutionised the system and went into factory work. I haven't found a huge amount of evidence for that. I know she'd still got an awful lot of outworkers. And of course, the warehouses are where the stock's held, so not necessarily where goods are made. There were factories, but that's a whole different bit of research, I suppose. So did she improve the system? Not so sure. I haven't managed to find a huge amount of evidence either way. And yeah, the chain making, that she moves on into doing chain making and other goods as well, other metal products. So the nail makers. Now, there's an awful lot of contemporary reports out there about the conditions of the nail makers. I think it was a bit of a middle class thing, almost like reading news, well, not reading newspapers, but gossip today. So it was all very gossipy. The middle class liked to sort of read about all these poor metal workers and this sort of awful squalid conditions that they lived and worked in. And people, yeah, like the Reverend Howard Riley, wanted to improve conditions for these poor workers. This was a big article that was published by Reverend Harold Rylett, and it was illustrated, some well-known illustrations by Tom Hill. I'll show you a couple of those in a minute. And we haven't got to read all of this, but it just gives you that idea of what it was like for the nail makers in their nail shops. And this is obviously not Eliza, but her workers. These are the people that work for her that make her rich. So here we go. It describes the typical nail shop, how many people are working in there. A man, 3 women, hard at work making hobnails. So we're looking at, you can see the hobnails down there. I found 3 generations of the same family, grandfather and grandmother, daughter and granddaughter. The old people are bent and worn with age and toil. Their daughter, a woman of middle age, presents unmistakable evidence of a hard life, while her daughter, apparently between 17 and 18, is a lissom and rather pleasant-looking girl. So the Reverend liked the daughter. She hadn't had the sign of a toil and age. She was still young, well, 18, young. We've just got a few images here that appeared in that article. Now, this is chain making here. Is my pointer working, Chris? Can you see a pointer? Chris?
No, I can't, Becky. Sorry.
No, okay. No worries. I was just I can point things out in the picture, but I'm sure people will be able to see. So, but you have to look closely because in the back you've got
It is working.
Oh, you can see my pointer. Either way, back left-hand side of the picture, you can see it's difficult because they're dark prints. But there's a small child hung up there in like a little high chair, I suppose. But it's hung up. It's a young girl, probably mum or sister, that's making these chains here. And then to the right of the picture, there's another little child asleep on the bellows. So it's this idea of whole families in sheds, work never ends. You know, you're next to the kitchen, next to your nail shop, you've just complete drudgery and toil. Here's some of the workers. What's this? Yeah, off to the foggers. So they're off to go and take their chains by the look of it, the way they're all around the neck, and a basket here, potentially nails. So they're off to the foggers, off to go and get paid for what they've made. And then this is where all the dodgy deals had come on, and they'd weigh them and say, "Oh no, you haven't worked up enough," or "That doesn't weigh what you say it does. We'll give you less money," and all these unpleasant business practices. This is interesting, just how far this ash pile goes up, halfway or up the houses there. So some really interesting images of nail making districts and just how much ash there is, how so dirty, and how much ash there is about. Oh, we've missed one. That was another one of some chain making or nail making, and I think there was a boy standing on the bellows. So it was a child working with an adult. And here we've got it says girl pointing spike nails. So many different types of nails as there is today, I suppose, but all sorts of different nails that would be made, different shapes and sizes, rivets, as well as chains. But this spike nail looks like quite a large nail that she's pointing there. And finally, one more before we get back to sort of Eliza herself, a bit more about her workers. And I love this quote. You can read most of it yourself. And I'm sure most of you, again, familiar with William Hutton. He writes about Birmingham in 1741. I can use this quote because nail making didn't change, between 1741 and 1851 when Eliza died. Same process going on in the same sort of places. But again, once again, the bit that makes me smile is in some of these shops, I observed one or more females stripped of her upper garment and not overcharged with their lower, wielding the hammer with all the grace of the sex. The beauties of their face were rather eclipsed by the smut of the anvil, or in poetical phrase, the tincture of the forge had taken possession of those lips, which might have been taken by the kiss. Very poetic. I think William's a little bit taken by some of these half-naked lady nail makers. And he was quite struck with the novelty. I inquired, whether the ladies in this country shod horses. But I was answered with a smile, they are nailers. So that was William Hutton having his eyes open to the nail makers. I think he was going to Darlaston. He was going from Walsall. Nails were made all over the place. There were certain centres, but nails were one of these jobs that you could pretty much do anywhere. Right, next one. So this was something I was quite focused on actually in my work in terms of how did Eliza behave? You know, what are the behaviours of a business person? First of all, I suppose. And this was all identified by Jennifer Aston, the lady that did the study of 50 different business women. And she decided that these were all the behaviours that successful businessmen displayed, businessmen. Last time I did this talk, somebody said, why have you got Daniel Batham on your slide? Well, there's no particular reason other than he's a local businessman, a local brewer. So he looks the part, I think. He looks like your typical businessman. So what sort of behaviours would Daniel behave and be displaying as a businessman? So conspicuous consumption, which is basically showing off, buying nice things like having a fancy car or a fancy watch or big house, lots of servants, making shrewd investments. So, you know, not just putting your money under a mattress, you buy shares or whatever else. Using the legal system. Providing for that philanthropy. So whether you like to or not, it doesn't mean you're a nice person, but middle-class business people were expected to give to charity and be seen to be doing good. You'd make a will, engage professional advisors, you would expand your business, and you'd branch into foreign trade. Well, all of those things Eliza did. You know, we've got examples of all of them. We'll have a little look through as we go at some of these aspects of what Eliza did. Yeah. First of all, we've got this myth, if you like, a myth of the babysitter. Wasn't just Eliza that didn't hand a business over to her sons. In Jennifer Aston's study, there was examples of numerous women that decided they weren't going to hand their businesses over. Numerous women changed the firm's name, made them their own, which we know Eliza changed the firm's name. We know she didn't take her sons into business, and we know she expanded and massively expanded the business, increased the workforce. And that was very similar to another lady in Leeds, a lady called Anne Buckley. She was a cloth cap manufacturer, but parallels really in the way that they both took their husbands' businesses, kept them for themselves, and renamed them. The difference between Eliza and Anne is that Eliza left a huge amount of money, and we'll look at her will a little bit later. So huge workforce and left an awful lot of money, which sets her aside really from any of the other businesswomen. So yeah, she was not just any old businesswoman, but an exceptionally successful one, and she was clearly and solidly middle class. Just because you're in business, you know, there's a lot of working class business people running much smaller businesses. So yeah, so we've got this myth of the babysitter, and Eliza certainly wasn't babysitting. This was her business. However, and I don't know if the person who kindly provided this slide is online this evening, but thank you so much for spoiling my previous slide, because on this source, it actually says she actually is using her husband's name to advertise. So all of that about, well, it's just a myth, and she took the business into her own hands, and you know, this kind of calls that into question just a little bit, because we're talking 1859. Her husband's been dead now for 8 years, and it's very difficult to read this slide, but she's trading in her name. She's Eliza Tinsley, but just underneath, widow of the late Thomas Tinsley. So she is still using his name to trade 8 years later. But I presume she got different invoices and different paperwork for different particular aspects of her business. It wasn't just one business. She got an awful lot of different things going on in different places. So this is she's selling her best charcoal horse nails. Where were they being made? Braidley's iron. So interesting source there, which I haven't got. You could use it for lots of other things. You could look at the sort of things she's selling and what prices she's selling and who she's selling to. And she's got, obviously, here we've said that she's a contractor to the Admiralty. The bit that stuck out for me was that it really does start to call into question some of the claims that are made. Things are always appearing all the time, aren't they? Oh, we've got another census now. So this is the census 10 years on from her husband's death. She's now living at Dudley Road, and Eliza is now employing, I think we're up to 3,000 people at this point, 3,000 workers, nail makers and chain makers. And Eliza here now, she's got her sons with her. Has she? No, I think her sons have already. We've got Thomas. Well, no, we've just got daughters. So we've got daughters. His daughters are with her. Lucy's still alive and she's a scholar. And there's has she got a visitor, or is that next time? I think next time she's got a visitor. What she has got is a governess, which is who's for Lucy. She's also got a cook, a housemaid, and another servant. Oh, yeah, the vicar's son. He is stopping with them, the visitor, Alfred. He's a local vicar's son. I traced him. But so absolutely typical sort of upper middle class. She's got the servant, she's got the governor, she's got the cook and the housemaid, and she's got the vicar's son coming to stay. So quite the local kind of, the local businesswoman. 10 years later, still going. We've got Eliza, and we've just got Eliza and Thomas here at the moment. So just the two of them. And for those two people, we've got Sarah Cornfield, her cook. We've got a parlour maid, a housemaid, and a kitchen maid. So they're all at the Limes. More staff than residents, if you like. So very, very successful. Nail and chain making, employing 4,000 people. We don't know how accurate that is, you know, the 4,000 people, but the fact they put 3,000 10 years ago, 4,000 now, it suggests she's sort of steadily, well, quite rapidly increasing her business. And we know this because we know that she had customers in Great Britain, in Ireland, all across Europe, the United States, Canada, the East Indies, New Zealand, and Australia. So all of those warehouses. I'm not sure how many existed, so how many customers she had before her husband died. It certainly wasn't such a concern as this. It was very much more local, being described as a nail factor, I think, rather than a sort of nail master. So it was a much smaller concern when her husband was running it. But by the time we get to 1976, she's got 7 warehouses all across the Black Country. Again, places you'd know, like Old Hill, Dudley, Sedgley, Bromsgrove, Netherton, Old Swinford, and Lower Gornal. They were all her warehouses. So she's got workers within walking distance of all of those places, because they would be making the goods mainly at home and taking them off to be weighed and for them to get paid in the warehouses. So she expanded her business. And the business continued. So I found this great picture, but fortunately there's so little you can find that was actually from Eliza's tenure, if you know what I mean, because the company carried on and it was very successful under Henry Green, I think his name was Henry. Under his stewardship, he was a colleague of Eliza's, one of the managers. He bought out part of the business and carried on running it. Up until fairly recently, it was the Greens that were in charge. So this is an image from slightly after Eliza's time, when the company made one of the largest chains for in a long time to leave the Black Country. What does it say? Longest and heaviest chain in one length, dispatched from the Black Country in many years. And that's from their Old Hill. That was where their head office was, in Old Hill. So the business continues. She left it all in good shape. We've got Tinsley chain today, still being made. This is a good one. Very interesting source. Not going to read it all out, but basically what she does, she sends the bellman round. So if you think of the town crier, whilst there was a Nail Masters Association, whilst all prices were agreed, for some reason, Eliza decided she's going to act outside of that and do her own thing. And she sends somebody round, like a town crier, ringing his bell, all around the districts, all those places next to the warehouses. And the bellman asked it, what it says, cry a notice to the effect that she was compelled, owing to the depression of the nail trade, to give imitation of her intention after next Saturday of a deduction of 20% from the present rate of wages, irrespective of the class of nails they made. In this source, it says she employs between 2,000 and 3,000 nailers. Yet the nailers are now enduring many privations and their suffering will be greatly increased, only receiving 4 shillings in place of every 5. So she does that independently of the prices that are supposedly agreed within the Nailmasters Association. But why I think I find it so interesting is how you manage your workforce when they're all working in different houses and backyard workshops, and you can't send everyone an email. We can't all get on the Zoom link. So that's how she did it. It was a case of a town crier going and calling out that your wages are going down. She uses the local legal system. This is another example of business, of what you'd expect a businessman to do. So she's using the local legal system. Lots of fines. People were being fined for failing to work up iron, or for disposing of it, or taking it and selling it on to somewhere else. Some of these people get prison, and some of them are ordered to make up the work. Some of them are fined. But either which way, she was no pushover, and she used the local legal system. Another little article I found, which was way back in, well, going back to 1853. So 2 years after her husband died, somebody steals a silver spoon from the limes. And I just love newspaper articles, because not only you kind of get a window on the world at this time, it's the other little articles that you read next to them as well. Like, adjacent to that article will be something else. And I remember reading something all about this spelling bee competition at the Temperance Hall, which was fascinating. Right, let's flick through because we're getting a little bit out of time. Dealing with international fraud. So another excellent story, another excellent scandal. That it's the fraud of Ford case. It happened in 1870. So she was defrauded of roughly £500,000. They did catch up with him. So she'd sent an associate, Richard Leonard, over to Australia. No, not. I'm accusing the wrong person. So Richard Leonard Lloyd, he actually was the one who apprehended William Forder. I don't want to get that wrong, because Richard Lloyd was an associate, and he carried on running the Australian Tinsley Empire. But William E. Forder, not so much. He was sentenced to 4 years hard labour for his part in, basically, he pawned all the goods that had been sent over that he was supposed to get good money for, and lost an awful lot of money, put them into pawn, went and ran off and lived in some hotel somewhere, and eventually caught up with him. But the Melbourne correspondence put, perhaps it's a few of these fast Jews that get this place the name of being fast. Too many of such, unfortunately, are being sent out here. So he's not happy at all these fraudsters going out to Australia. Eliza's will was fascinating. Also disappointing, because Jennifer Aston had kind of promised me in her, well, she hadn't promised me, but in her work, all the wills that she'd looked at were really illustrating, the women's lives, the business women that she looked at. They were leaving bequests to different friends and family, favourite hairbrush, or a nice set of glasses. Well, Eliza's will was really, really impersonal. She doesn't bequeath anything special to anybody. She leaves very few sort of special gifts. There's a couple of gifts that she leaves for female beneficiaries, and she does note for their sole and separate use. That's to try and make sure that the money doesn't go to their husband. But it was very, very, very business orientated. So I suppose it was illuminating in that sense, but it certainly didn't really give me any insight into her, other than the fact that she was most definitely a businesswoman, very business orientated. And in this document as well, we can see that she got significant investments and share interests. I'm no expert when it comes to reading wills and legal documents, but I transcribed it, and it was available as a document to come back to at some point, should anybody wish. Okay, we're getting there. So her later life now. I think we covered business reasonably well there. There was such a lot. I did far too much, really. I couldn't fit it all in, and I could have kept on going. But anyway, let's carry on. Let's get to her later life. So she's only retired. She has 4 years of retirement. She retires in 1878, and 1882 she's passed away. But in her retirement, one of the things that these successful business women do is feeding the poor. And again, in another newspaper article, we find Eliza feeding the poor. Not herself, she gives the money. Somebody else is feeding the poor. But what does it? But for money kindly given by Mrs. Tinsley for the purpose. Soup is being given twice a week. Twice a week to a large number of recipients. And then Mrs. Griffith's been zealously engaged in the kind work of providing it to the poor. So also gives you, so sources like this give you a little bit of an idea of what, not just what's going on in Eliza's life, but what's going on in Sexley and Coseley in the local area. So the distress at and around this place is daily becoming more and more serious. Scarcely a branch of trade that has anything to do, and a great many families are consequently almost without food. So on Christmas Day, 200 children were fed with tea, bread, butter and cake. And that was at the Temperance Hall, somewhere that Eliza was really heavily involved. Now, her death. And I've put here, what an insult, because this is a death certificate. She dies in 1882. Her husband's been dead over 30 years. We've just talked all about this business that she's expanded and her investments and her will and her servants. But here, her occupation is described as widow of Thomas Tinsley, nailmaster. Make of that what you will. I know it was obviously the convention at the time, but I just can't get over it that a woman after 30 years of all that business success is her occupation is in relation to her husband, long gone. She died of a heart attack. It says degeneration of the heart, I think. Is it? So fatty something. Yes, so she got a heart attack, I presume. I mean, the pictures that we see of her, she was quite plump. And the other pictures that are available in the Dudley Archive, she does look quite a large lady, living quite a sedentary life, I suppose. And that's what kills her. She's 69, I think. We can find her obituary, and it does seem that she was quite a popular local lady, although nobody's obituaries particularly horrible about Eliza. But she was involved in lots of philanthropy and charity. Mrs. the classes, a warm friend of the local home mission to which she largely contributed. Her decease will be generally lamented, especially among the poor of Sedgley, to whom she was a great friend in times of necessity and bad trade. Just one obituary in one of the local, the Dudley District News. I'm sure there's others if I was to hunt round and find different, such a lot out there. But yeah, they talk here about employing between 3,000 and 4,000 hands, retired from business a few years ago. So carried on under the style of Eliza Tinsley and Co. But she was, you can see, involved in lots of sort of the local church, local charities. But she didn't have, I'm looking at the time, right, she didn't have, what's the word? She certainly didn't seem to have a close family life, which I'm going to struggle with in terms of time for coming on to this. But obviously, two of her daughters died. Her other daughter died young. We don't see any evidence of her grandchildren. That's not to say they weren't visiting. And her boys had all disappeared, the bachelors. But it does suggest that she did still have like a fulfilling life, but it was in terms of friends and sort of local charitable things. I'm going to, because Chris, how are we now? Shall I just fly through this last little bit?
Oh, you can carry on. How much more have you got, Becky?
No, well, it's just the last bit about legacy, and I can just fly through.
Carry on at your pace. That's fine.
Time, you see. I should be able to. I end up having to do this. I sort of end up having to zip through the last little bit. But we might as well. There's not a huge amount left. It's just talking about her legacy now. So, of course, she left a huge legacy. Local, national, international, a family, a house. Let's have a quick look through at sort of things that we can consider to be Eliza's legacy. Oh, this is interesting. Immediate family legacy. And we've got reading of the will there. So you can almost imagine Eliza, her voice from beyond the grave, controlling matters. She adds a codicil in 1878, and it's basically saying she's lent her sons some money, Charles and George, and just because they are the executors of her will, she will not be letting them off that money, and she must pay it back. So it's not my intention by appointing them my executors to release them from the obligation of accounting for those sums of money as part of my personal estate. The said Charles Theophilus Tinsley and George Tinsley, respectively, shall not intermeddle with anything of this my will, or take advantage of his appointment of executor for the discharge of the same debt. So she expected every penny they'd borrowed to be paid back. There is a lot of interesting things with her business, how she doesn't give it to the children. She kind of splits it and sells it, and she wasn't giving anybody anything. And she certainly wasn't letting those boys off their debts. We can see the Limes' legacy. The Limes is, you could do a whole talk just about this building, really. It's such an interesting local landmark in Sedgley. And it's all been fully restored now. So that's what it looked like in 1816. And I got this image. It is copyrighted, and it was from a private collection, a lady called Christine. And she was kind enough to share these pictures with me. And that's a picture from 1816. It looks it's not long been built there. You can see just how new it all is. In fact, strange little monkey puzzle tree there in the foreground. There's a couple more images. That was before it was vandalised. I haven't got one of it when it was vandalised. It was an awful mess. I used to go past it on the bus sometimes. And all of that was all sort of spray painted and all sorts. But luckily, instead of it being burnt down and disappearing like so many lovely historic buildings, it was refurbished. And this picture here is roughly 2017. It's been turned into flats now. It's a shame. I went on a little field trip to the Limes and to the church and what have you when I was doing this work, and they've got an information board. It's all about the history of the building and what it was used for after Eliza's time, but unfortunately it's looking a bit tired now. This is her old premises. The old sort of head office is one of the head offices in Cradley Heath, and when that was knocked down, the housing estate was built, and Tinsley Avenue. We've now got a Tinsley Avenue named after the Tinsley building. We've got an Eliza Tinsley ward, and again reopening in 2009. The famous picture there being held by the nurse in the middle, and that's at Raleigh Regis. Still a global hardware brand. I haven't checked in lately actually to see who's took it over next, but up until fairly recently it was still owned or still run and managed by the Green family, but it's been taken over by bigger organisations. But when I last looked on the website, they were still using her picture, her name, and seemed really quite proud of their history. We've got evidence of Eliza's legacy in Melbourne in Australia. Here's that was her premises there. The picture is of one of the buildings that she operated out of in Melbourne, and bit like the Black Country Museum and buildings here, they're saying, what do we do with the building? What are we going to do with it? Because we don't want to just knock it down. And they've proposed that there's a big skyscraper built behind it. I'm not sure how far that got. Even as far as Tasmania, we can see Eliza Tinsley and her presence. And she's had a rebrand for the 21st century. So, there we know. I'm guessing you all know who that is. But this is a revamped Eliza Tinsley. A bit different from the picture. And the reason that she had this artwork was commissioned is that she's part of a board game called Brass. And I think it was a lady called Joyce who put forward Eliza as a name to be involved in this game. So I'm very grateful to her for putting forward Eliza and, not just having all the big male greats. There it is. There's the board game. I think it was just coming out when I was writing this, so 5 or 6 years ago. They've got editions for Lancashire, and Eliza comes under the Birmingham one. I'm sure some of you Black Country people would have something to say about that. So, if we go back to what Inda and all this mentioned to begin with, was Eliza a figurehead, or merely a figurehead? Was she just manipulated by these other male businessmen for their own ends and to just sort of be a novelty advertisement for the company? Well, I don't think so. She was definitely an exceptional woman, but I don't think it was because she was a female business owner, because we know there was plenty of those. And it wasn't because she held on to the business, because, again, we know through Aston's work, lots of women held on to businesses despite having sons. And again, it isn't because she was engaged in this masculine, male-dominated trade. Aston's work shows us lots of women were involved in what we'd consider male-dominated industries. So why? Well, oh no, Chris, it's all gone wrong on the last slide. I've forgotten why I thought she was. I can't go back now. Chris?
I will try and find it on my backup and share slide.
It's the last one, and I've forgotten. And now I've lost it. My mind has now gone blank as to why I think she's exceptional.
Okay.
I've kind of ruined it. I've ruined my last slide.
Right. Can you stop sharing your slide, Becky?
Stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, stop sharing. And I will start sharing. Oh, hold on.
I'm so sorry, everyone. We were going so well.
I will get there. Hold on just a moment.
There's only 3 bullet points, which I should be able to remember. I haven't got the notes with me. This is a lesson, isn't it?
Right.
I've normally presentation, I haven't. But what? So why was she exceptional? Let's think why she was exceptional.
There you go. Can you see it?
No, hang on. Let's come back on this. Hooray! Yes, got it. My mind went blank then. I could not remember why she was so exceptional. So why was she so exceptional? Well, it was not the reasons we've just gone through, but why? I think it was because she grew the business so significantly. You know, it was quite a small concern, and it ended up being this huge multinational business, really. Her wealth as well. Now, I have to look back at how much she left, but it was several million in today's money, and that we can find that. But she left more money than any of the women that were in Aston's study, a hell of a lot more. One of the things we haven't been able to talk much about today, and I often thought I'd like to do a talk about it on its own, is that she was such a contributor to Sedgley Civic Society. We briefly mentioned, didn't we, about the philanthropy and working with charities, but there's such a lot of interest in terms of her links with the Temperance Society, with the church, and with other local sort of middle class people, whether that be business people or church people. And I think that would be fascinating on its own to kind of look at these networks and links that happen. So that's why I think Eliza was an exceptional woman. And then for the final slide, Chris, if you don't mind, just some final thoughts. And this is really about managing my research. I didn't know when to stop, really. I tried probably to do too much. So if everything feels a little bit kind of like, oh, there was this and oh, there was that, that's because that's what happened when I was studying. I think Malcolm was pulling his hair out with me. So instead of having one single set of sources, as a lot of historians might do, I was looking for everything to put it all together, that patchwork approach. And that's probably because my background isn't particularly history, it's more social science and sociology. So I'm not used to just going for one thing. I'm used to looking around a subject. So I probably did try to do too much. I never knew when to stop. And when I needed to stop researching and start writing, because there's just so much out there. And of course, research doesn't just stop, does it? We've seen that wonderful source that somebody provided me with for this evening. So things constantly pop up. There's possibilities that there's family letters and papers, that things I that came up too late in my work. I was sort of writing it by the time some of these things come up that I couldn't go back. So there's so many potential for future talks and possible publications, her life story. But I suppose that's down to me or down to someone else to pick up on that. So I hope you've all enjoyed that. I've quite enjoyed it. I run over 15 more minutes than I intended. But I think we've managed to just about fit everything in. So thank you. Who do I say thank you to? Andrew?
Ward's just going to say thank you to you.
Oh, okay, Ward. Thank you.
No, that was absolutely fascinating, and you've broadened the picture of what I guess most of us knew about Eliza Tinsley. Without
Yeah.
further ado, I will hand over to my good colleague Andrew, who will take questions from the chat box and feed.
It's scary now. I might have to come back to some of you. I'm a bit rusty with some of it.
Thanks so much, Becky.
Thank you, Andrew.
Not sure whether I'm actually on screen. I've got all sorts of things popping up here.
Oh, I can see you.
Can you see me?
I can see you, yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. We're doing well.
Always good. Yeah, thanks ever